Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee A Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today we're looking at Season 1, Episode 15 of SpongeBob, Sleepy Time and Suds, both of which aired in January 17th, 2000. So, depending on how you look at it, welcome back to the 2000s or welcome to the 2020s. And before we continue, I'll just like to say that both of these episodes were written by the same people, Paul Tibbett, Ennio Teresen Jr., and Mr. Lawrence, so we might as well see how they handle different subject matters and different scenarios. That's the mark of a good writer, so let's get into these. Sleepy Time was the very first glimpse we got of SpongeBob in the year 2000, but ironically enough, it was the last Season 1 episode to be completed. Its production code implies that it's the 41st. When you look at all the material that's been released of it, like all the cells, all the storyboards, at least all that we have. So it's no wonder that the animation in this one is a lot slicker and cleaner than most of Season 1. Like, compare this to Tea at the Tree Dome and you'd be blown away. And I can kind of see why they saved a dream episode for the last episode that they wanted to do for this season, because it makes a lot of sense. You've covered all the bases, might as well go as far into the imagination as you can. And this episode, if nothing else, is incredibly imaginative. I love it for that. And here we have what SpongeBob dreams about. Basically being able to go wherever he wants in his own little world in a race car. I mean, it kind of makes sense. He has a lifelong dream to get a boating license, and a dream is also like an aspiration. You know what I mean. And earlier in this scene, we saw SpongeBob's driver's license, or a fantasy one. There's later a real one in No Free Rides in Season 2. And it says that he was born on July 14th, 1986, meaning that he'd be 33 today, but he was 13 when this episode aired. But I doubt that SpongeBob has a set age that the writers really cared about. Like, they make a joke about it in the recent 20th anniversary special, but SpongeBob is basically any age you want him to be, depending on the scenario. That's how I look at it, and goodness gracious, this just looks beautiful. I do kind of miss the cell animated look for SpongeBob. I know it's kind of cliche to say that I miss the cell animation of Days Yonder, but episodes like this do look really good when it looks a little cleaner and more authentic, more realistic in a way. Like it's an actual piece of paper and you get all these nice visuals that you can collect, you can own, and you can sort of see the hand-painted effort in them. And in general, I do like Gary's dream of being smart and owning the biggest library he can. Seems very in character for a snail to be smart. You know what I mean. I was just going a little off track there because I was trying to remember the limerick that Gary talked about, which is foreshadowing for the next episode, intentionally or not. And I don't remember who exactly does Gary's voice here. I doubt it's Tom Kenny, but they did a pretty good job of making him sound otherworldly, just making it a little weirder. And here we get Patrick's dream, which is basically not much, virtually nothing. This is the second blank expanse in Season 1. It seems to be a recurring trend now. But I like this aspect to Patrick that they're trying to explore here, that he is content with his life. He doesn't want anything more than he already has. He lives under a rock. How much more desperate can he be? Oh, and SpongeBob's saying a million. Thank you. But yeah, that must have been a very difficult scene to draw constantly, all those SpongeBobs surrounding Patrick. But as I was saying, Patrick's dream is probably the most famous, or second most famous depending on how you view Plankton's. but it is the one most people remember about this episode because it is the easiest to remember. It is the easiest to dream back on, in a way. Squidward's dream is honestly my least favorite in this episode because it just has a lot of these little nagging issues that grow with SpongeBob and Squidward as a dynamic over the years. But it is a very creative dream. I will give it that benefit of the doubt. Squidward wanting to be Mozart, a talented musician that is still remembered to this day. And this King character is okay. Like, I don't think I've said on this channel yet how I feel about D. Bradley Baker's Australian or British voice. It's more Australian to me. That he has for characters like this and the art guy and Artist Unknown and occasionally the blue shark dude. It is a little annoying for me personally, but it's fine for King. And SpongeBob in this particular scene as a clarinet is really dang annoying, but I like it because it is part of the joke that SpongeBob can infest Squidward's dream and just make it all about him. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I were penning this scene, I would have already put a SpongeBob in this dream because it just shows how much he affects Squidward's life. That's just what I think. And speaking of what I think of this episode, I don't think I've ever laid down exactly how good I think it is because back in my Sponge Buddy Mania days, I sort of skipped out on this one. Like, I remember my review of it was back in 2016 was incredibly lazy, like, oh, it's good, trust me, watch it for yourself. But in general, I want my reviews to be, you've already watched it, what do you want me to think about it? What do you think? What do you want to hear me say about it? And that's something that I didn't know back in 2016, but I thankfully know today. That opinions are sort of good in that regard. Sorry, I was just getting a little sidetracked because Sandy's dream has started and she's into extreme stunts. Seemingly back in her hometown of Texas. It's probably the most suburban SpongeBob's ever looked, that little pan to the ground. But yeah, this did heavily inspire the Sandy's Dream portion of the video game Battle for Bikini Bottom, which is pretty much the only part of the dream world in that game that actually takes some influence from this episode. Like, SpongeBob's dream is the hub world and doesn't look like it. Mr. Krabs' dream is entirely different, and Patrick's dream is in a dark void instead of a white one. Guess they knew when to add some variety. And yet we have Pearl's dream. She dreams of candy, lollipops, boy bands. Remember, she is a teenager. And sea unicorns. Not necessarily a sea horse. And this was before they made them more look like real horses. So the sea unicorn you see there is a little smaller than, like, Mystery. Should have called him Debbie. But Pearl's dream is a nice distraction. Less intense than the previous one and far less intense than what we see from Mr. Krabs' dream, where he dreams of being in the tale of Moby Dick, but Moby Dick is a Moby Dollar. Do you think Ernest Hemingway would have known that a crab fishing for $1 would be inspired by his tragic tale? But yeah, this is one of those scenes in this episode that looks incredible. Like, because of the colors, it is a little darker. It doesn't look quite like what you see from season 1, but the character designs start to look a little like they do in season 2, even more so than in very early season 2 episodes, so yeah. Oh, and Mr. Krabs was born in 1942, making him 77 today. Just a little sad thing to let you know, but I do think that it was necessary showing another license of some variety, but just to add into the joke earlier that SpongeBob should have taken a picture of himself with a mustache. Mr. Krabs actually had a mustache when he took that picture. Oh, and the dream is ending and it's pretty negative. But after this, we get to the dream that probably had the most influence and the most legacy after this. because this is basically the selling point of the 2006 video game Creature from the Krusty Krab, which was on PS2, Wii, that sort of era, that sort of transitional era between the 6th and 7th gens. And they had a lot to go off of because Plankton being a giant monster destroying the town, this is his dream, his aspiration, to be taller, just big enough to crush his enemies. Really good idea for a portion of an episode, and a very good idea for like the end point of a video game. Not that they really knew that SpongeBob would have video games back in 1999 and 2000, but hey, that's what success leads to, am I right? And I think that's like the only time Gary's actually been called a kitty or a cat or a feline in any way. And it's mostly just Plankton being like condescending in a way. And I want to know if the scream Plankton's making here as he's shrinking, was it artificially pitched up, or was Mr. Lawrence just that good at doing like a low voice going into a screech? I don't know, but what I do know is that this ending is a bit of a weak shot. Like, it isn't my favorite ending in the show. It isn't the most satisfying, just having all these characters that SpongeBob's invaded the dreams of come over and yell at him. I mean, it does tie things together, but what else does it do? But really, it doesn't affect the quality of the episode all around for me too much. Because the rest of this is very inventive. I know I use this word a lot, but it is very creative. And it is very funny. It's an incredible comedic riot, and I recommend you check this one out if you haven't in a long time, because there is a lot to love here. Even with this ending, I will say that much. Up here we have Suds, which was written by Paul Tibbett, Ennio Teresen Jr., and Mr. Lawrence. The animation was directed by Edgar, I don't want to butcher your last name. And it starts at night. It starts with SpongeBob having a dream about Krabby Patties. Are we sure we didn't just watch this one? Like, I wonder why they put 2 episodes together that started with SpongeBob dreaming. Maybe it was supposed to be irony, maybe this is supposed to be the same night in a sadistic kind of way. Maybe the prophecy Gary was talking about last episode just came true with SpongeBob biting something, in this case his pillow. Well, whatever it is, this episode does get off to an unoriginal but interesting start. SpongeBob needs something, a midnight snack. And that comes with a price of him going to bed, going back to sleep too quickly, and needing to cure his cold that he gets after the fridge has been on for too long. And I'm basically just recapping the plot summary because this episode works much better when you've got the visuals. This is a very visual gag driven episode. In fact, this episode does like visual comedy a lot better than most other season 1 episodes. I'd say it's up there in that regard, but the story itself is fine, just nothing too spectacular. A lot of cartoons have an episode where a character gets the cold and they all deal with it in their own different ways. With SpongeBob, it's more about like being dirty, because he doesn't get colds, he gets the suds. And basically, if you've ever owned a sponge, most of you probably have, suds are what happen when like it gets too wet and soapy. It needs to be cleaned out a little. It's kind of weird, but it's kind of... Really not too much to say about this intro besides just watch it. I know I'm being pretty hypocritical because I just chastised my 2016 self for being that way about Sleepy Time, but Suds is just that interested in its like animation and visual comedy. And in general, one of the few really interesting anecdotes about this first half of the episode is that Tom Kenny said in an interview a couple years after this that he was actually sick when he did this episode. So Yeah, you're hearing if SpongeBob were actually sick. I think that's an interesting anecdote, and how come Gary's allowed in the Krusty Krab? Don't they have a no pet policy, or is that just in worse episodes? So yeah, whenever SpongeBob sneezes, a bunch of pink bubbles come out, and I think that is what separates this, like, visually from a lot of other sick episodes, because you've got something a little more appealing, being the snot in a way. Like, I could imagine this episode being a lot more gross, but they went for something a little more original. They went for pink bubbles, and that sort of sweetens the deal. This is a sick episode that is interesting. It is in character. It is set within this world's rules. Not that SpongeBob has that many rules, but you know what I mean. And this little thing about Sandy and the Jackrabbit thing, I don't know. It's sort of a running gag in this episode. She does it twice. SpongeBob and Patrick get tired of it. I like to imagine that she does it a lot, and SpongeBob and Patrick are just tired of it at this point. Oh, and I really like his sick get-up, his cold get-up here. That's the thing. This is sort of treated like the common cold, but only if SpongeBob had a lot of really nasty food in his refrigerator would he actually get sick from a cold house. And here, Patrick enters the scene, and this episode's story goes in a completely different direction than you're probably expecting. It goes into Patrick's doctor phobia, which comes up again a couple years after this in The Whole Tooth, which is a season 9 episode. Last season 9 episode, actually. And I do kind of like this angle of Patrick being scared of the doctor because of a friend of a friend of a friend who knew this guy's cousin, and scaring SpongeBob about it in the simplest ways. Who knows how many old magazines SpongeBob would have to read? Isn't that just the most awful thing about waiting rooms? And the ways in which Patrick tries to cure SpongeBob are, again, creative, original, inventive. These are words that I'm using a lot today. But 20 years on, they still mean a lot. I do like that Patrick tries to clog SpongeBob up. That was originally meant to be like a more graphic, more realistic close-up. It appears on a trading card, actually. And here we see SpongeBob swell up like a balloon because all the suds are inside him. They aren't being released. And sure, that means Patrick has less of a chance of getting quote-unquote infected. Don't know if starfish can get the suds. What am I saying? Of course starfish don't get the suds. They get something else. Probably. But yeah, Patrick faking being a doctor is sort of controversial. It happens more than once on the show, faking being a doctor, but in this case, SpongeBob wants Patrick to be his doctor, and Patrick's just more than happy to fill that role. And here we get some more sense of urgency. There's an actual plot coming back to it, because Patrick doesn't want Sandy to take SpongeBob to the doctor. He wants SpongeBob to be cured by his best friend, even if most of that curing is just elaborate playtime. You know what I mean when this episode doesn't treat Patrick's character at the absolute best? Like, Patrick's characterization, I've been over this a lot, but Season 1 Patrick is a whole lot of different things, and that whole lot of different things is completely on display in Season 1 in this episode. Like, he is a chill dude at points, he is a crazy dude at points. He is a somewhere in between for most of that, and now he's trying all these different ways to cure SpongeBob. Now, none of it's working, and at this point it just feels more like playtime than actual curing, honestly. But I like it. It does sort of further the visual feel of this episode. Like, if this were translated into like an audio drama or something, I don't know why it would need to. Wouldn't be the same. This episode does rely on its gags a little too much, but the gags are pretty good. There's a particularly good one over here where Patrick disguises SpongeBob as his own house because SpongeBob is just that big and bulbous now. I do like that. They looked at a different thing in the world that is sort of dome-shaped, and they made SpongeBob that thing. It is very basic visual comedy, but it's the kind of thing I like this episode for. And I think that the point you would want to make about this episode at this point kind of depends on your opinion of sick episodes in general, because it starts to get a little more generic after this, minus the SpongeBob bouncing, because there was a pretty big halitosis joke just there. And in general, SpongeBob's cold is taken a little more seriously now that Patrick has completely ruined him. But I do like this during Patrick and Sandy's big fight, that SpongeBob just has this very bored expression on him. Sort of adds to the idea that not only is he getting tired of all the shenanigans and just wants to be legitimately cured, but also just he's that sick now. Sandy and Patrick have a little fight. Sandy says that Patrick should be arrested. Do bring that up in my Code Yellow review. And there's the floral structure that's sometimes on Bikini Bottom around this time. It disappears shortly after this, so I guess that's one of the last times you'll be able to see it. I'm surprised that the Krusty Krab is visited twice in this episode. Like, you only really remember the scene where SpongeBob destroys it. No, not the scene where he destroys it, that's the one going right now. My mind is a little hazy. The one where he is sick and Mr. Krabs doesn't want him to get the other customers sick. That sort of dynamic is visited a lot later in the show, but here it's more original, so I'll say that. And I think this is the first time we see the Bikini Bottom Hospital. I think it's given a different name after this. But here, we get the sponge treatment, with Hans making probably his absolute first appearance after the title sequence. Pretty original. Oh, and there's Tom Kenny getting a scrub from SpongeBob in different ways. They use some footage of him from the shower later in Neptune's Spatula for a different joke. And I think that's kind of interesting that 2 episodes just needed one set of jokes in one reel of footage. That I kind of like. Oh, and here we get Patrick paying the price for ruining his best friend's life for a couple minutes. That is to be expected. Like, Patrick doesn't get karma a lot, but when he does in cases like this, oh, it's satisfying. I do love how it goes to live action. The live action stuff isn't everyone's cup of tea in SpongeBob in general, but here I think it works in just the general absurdity of a doctor checkup. So that's a good episode, and my question of the week for you this week is, in your opinion, what is the worst thing Patrick has ever done? Because this episode does start to show us that Patrick can be a bit of a dinglewad at some points, but he does get a lot worse later on, so let me know, in your opinion, what you remember to be Patrick at his absolute lowest in terms of moral values or comedy. Because I haven't done that many negative questions, and I want to see what you guys don't like about the show or its later seasons or even its earlier seasons. These were both pretty solid episodes, covering different things, and they were both made in 1999, so goodbye 90s SpongeBob. Goodbye for now.